So I do think that before we kind of jump into Zechariah's song and this really cool story about naming, it's a story of a father and a mother and a community naming a child. And of course, we all have names. We all have been given names, and not just one. And for that reason, I think this text has a lot of meaning for us. There's a lot of access points for our hearts. But we have to understand that what's happening in this particular story has to do with this man, Zechariah, and this interaction, this exchange he has with an angel called Gabriel, who physically appears to him in the temple and tells him, you're going to have a son. Actually, he doesn't say it's going to be a boy. He says you will have a child. And they don't know until he's born that it's a son. But you will have a child. And this promise is made to him about his child. And he's given this picture of what he's supposed to be. And he doubts it. How can I be sure, he says. Which isn't, I don't think it's a huge offense, to be honest. But Gabriel's really upset about this. And his response is, I'm Gabriel. Which I think is interesting because he basically says, let me tell you my name. Isn't that something? And he anchors the word he gives to the presence of God. He says, I'm Gabriel, I stand in the presence of God. And when I say something, you don't ask me, how can I be sure of these things? And so for that reason, you don't get to talk at all. Again, you don't get to say another word until, this is what Gabriel says, he says, until. He says, I am Gabriel, I stand in the presence of God, I have been sent to speak to you and tell you this good news. And now you will be silent and not able to speak until the day this happens. Now what's interesting is the promise is that he would have a son, that Elizabeth would bear a child. And that you think is fulfilled in the coming of the child, in the birth of the child. But that's not true. It's not until 8 days later that this thing is fulfilled. Because there's two parts here. There's the birth of the child, which feels like the promise fulfilled. It feels like just, okay, there it is. We didn't think we would have a child. Now we have a child. God has answered our prayers. He has delivered the goods on his promise. But no, actually, the thing, he's not, his tongue is not released when the baby is born. It's not until the 8th day when he names him. And that, of course, becomes the fulfillment of the promise, at least in the eyes of God. That's when his speech is released. It's in the naming. When all these things come to pass, what is it that has come to pass? It turns out it's not just the moment of his birth. It's this 8 days later when he's named. I mean, lots of boys would have been born that day. But this boy needed to be named, and he needed to be named something in particular. He needed to be called something. He needed to be defined. And that's what makes these things come to pass. It's the power of naming. And it's not just that God had a name for John. It's that God has a destiny for him. And somehow Zechariah's obedience, Zechariah's own view of things, Zechariah's life is somehow intertwined in the naming, in the destiny of his son. And Zechariah becomes free, and God becomes praised. And I think, if you'll allow me this latitude, I think that John becomes John on this day. He becomes who he is supposed to be in this act of naming. It's the power to release the Father. I mean, Zechariah is released in the naming of his son. And it's the power to bless and fill his son in the very same act. And I love that line. There's a couple phrases here that I'm going to work off of. The first one is this definitive statement, this declarative act when he says his name is John. He's settling the matter, and he's settling the matter as something that's already actually been settled. But as a father who has authority to make this sort of decision, he's saying, I'm choosing the name that's already been given to him by God. It's already been decided. And so he's remembering the name that Gabriel had given him. His name will be called John. And therefore, all this means, it's partly the parent giving up the vision for their own child, what they want him to be. It's partly giving up the community's demands on the child of what he's supposed to be for them, and instead saying the child belongs to God. The name is what really matters, is what does God think about this boy? Who is he supposed to be? What is he supposed to become? And ironically, when we name things, and we name a lot of things, we've all gotten names, we don't think about God that much in naming. We don't ask ourselves if God somehow has given a name to the children that we bear. And the problem is not that God is not naming us. The problem is that we have grown deaf to those names. We don't even ask anymore. We don't even imagine that it's true. Our assumption, I think, is that, and I'm just talking about parents here, your parents, my parents, me as a parent, I mean, we just assume that the act of naming is our choice. And actually, we are predated. The knowledge of that child is before its birth. What is it that God said to Jeremiah or to David, before you were born, I knew you. Before you were knit together in your mother's womb, I knew you. I knew your name. I know who you are. So it's not just a mother that beholds her newborn child and says, this new person needs a name and I must deliver a name. Actually, this newborn person is already known by God. And you were already known by God before you were born. You see, a name in that sense is, in the sense that it's used here, is not just a signifier. It's not just what we're going to call him. It's more than that. Now, I know a little bit about naming things because, of course, I've named 6 children, so that's a lot of naming. I've done my fair share there. And I give them lots of names, too. I don't just give them the name that I originally gave them. I come up with other names, too. And some are good, and some are bad, and some are funny. It's dependent on the situation, which name I use. Actually, Eve, some of you know Eve is my 17-year-old. She'll actually be 18 next week. God help us all. And in my phone, my name for her is Pooter. Pooter is the name that I've given her. I'm not exactly sure why or where that came from, but that's still what I call her, except when she's upsetting me. But I've named not just people or kids, but what I've actually had the privilege, the responsibility to name loads of things, dozens of things, ministries, communities, projects, conferences, products. I've done quite a bit of naming over the course of my life and career. And what's interesting about, at least for me in the process of naming, is I don't take it lightly. I mean, if you're going to start a microchurch, let's say, and you have to, I mean, many of you have done this, and you had to come up with a name, and you just didn't pick something that sounded cool. You really probably thought a great deal about it. Probably you even prayed about it. I mean, every time I come up with a name for something, a project or a community or a new ministry idea or whatever, I really give it a lot of thought. I mean, an example would be the Underground. I can remember it has to be a prophetic thing. And we know that because we know that we're gonna call this thing this name forever, possibly. And that name is going to define the way we feel about it, the reaction that other people have to it. We understand the importance and power of naming something, except when it comes to people. I mean, I can still remember I was studying in London, and if you've ever been to London, you know that one of the sort of ubiquitous characteristics of the city is this underground train system that runs, the London Underground, which runs beneath the city. And I can still remember being in the Underground and just being overwhelmed, being sort of like amazed at this interconnected network of tunnels and trains that hold that city together. It's an invisible, humble thing that transforms, allows the city to be this living, powerful thing, one of the best cities in the world, because of this invisible system beneath it. And I thought, that should be our name. But even then, I still thought a lot about it. I kept praying about it. I began to think about all these other connotations, the underground church and in history, the underground church that exists today in our time. which is persecuted, and its people give their lives for the sake of the gospel. And I start thinking, man, I want to be a tribute to the underground church in history and in our time. A name matters, and it's so significant that we take it so seriously. We don't take it lightly because we know what it means. We know that from that point on, as soon as we name it, that's what people are going to call us. That's what people will that's how they'll think about what we're doing. And it becomes a marker that we're supposed to remember something about who we are. There's many times where I've seen a ministry named, either I've named it or other people have named it, and we have to ask ourselves, when you feel that mission drift away from your original intent, the founding intent of the ministry, you always go back to the name. Well, what do we call it in the first place? What are we supposed to be? It's a memory of a future, a memory of a vision of what it was you feel that God was saying, this is who you're supposed to be. Now, let me ask you this question. If I take something as innocuous as branding so seriously, how seriously do you think the eternal and gracious Creator God who made all human beings, how seriously do you think he takes the naming of each one? I mean, do we really think that God would leave the naming of his creation to deaf, dumb, and blind parents who are blind to their own sin, deaf to his voice, and dumb to the truth of the whole of reality of creation? He wouldn't do it. And I would venture to say most of us in this room have been misnamed. We have been misnamed. It implies that God knows you, knew you, and actually thinks of you in a certain way and has a name for you. Now, I don't know if your name is was supposed to be Bill or something like that. That's not what I'm saying. I don't really actually know the meaning of the name Bill. Maybe it's profound, and maybe that actually is your name. Maybe you're a woman and your name is actually Bill. I don't know. I mean it more in a deeper sense of what does your name mean? Who are you meant to be? Of course, John, the name John, has the implication of grace, of mercy, that God is merciful. God is gracious. He has shown favor to his people. This is supposed to be this boy's name. And it matters. He cannot be called something else. And if it is, the implication, I think, is if he is called something else, it will change the trajectory of his life. He will not go the way he's supposed to go. He will not become the man he's supposed to be if he is misnamed. And if I'm right about that, and if I'm also right about the thing I just said 20 seconds ago, which is that most have been misnamed, then the implication is it is a part of the feature of the sinfulness of our parents and our own sinfulness, the deafness of our world to the voice of God, that we start off life with the wrong name. And we must recover from it. It's part of what salvation does. It's part of what a relationship with Jesus does for us. And that implies there must be a renaming, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Every human endeavor is marred and marked by sin, so much so naming. We just, by and large, don't do it right. We don't. But God still has a name for you. I really believe that. This, by the way, is, I think, part of why Jesus was fond of renaming people that were really close to him. Maybe it was just a matter of time. Maybe they all got renamed and it just didn't get recorded. But we know, for example, Simon, he preferred to call him Peter, which is just the word rock, stone, something solid. He takes Simon's name and he says, that's fine, your parents named you that, but I call you this. The other sort of massive character in the New Testament is this the man Paul, which was not his name was Saul, and his name gets changed by Jesus. Through the community of Jesus, he's given a different name, a new name, which represents his calling to the Gentiles. You can even go back even to the relationship that God has with his people in general, which is defined by an encounter that a man named Jacob has with God in the presence of God, and his name is changed to Israel. God says, you're not going to be called Jacob, you're going to be called Israel. And all of your descendants will be called Israel. And by the way, that name shaped Israel. It made them partly who they are. Israel, the name, the word means those who struggle with God, who wrestle God, who fight with God. And that's who Israel becomes, this sort of perpetual struggling with God. Yesterday, my fifth born, Simeon, just became 13. His birthday was yesterday, and so we went fishing. I'm terrible at fishing. I literally don't know the first thing about fishing. In fact, my boys have to bait my hook and do the whole thing, and then I'm putting it in the water. And anyway, nobody caught anything, so I don't feel that bad. Although it could partly be because I chose the place, and that's also probably why we didn't catch anything. The guy that doesn't know anything about fishing, but they loved it. They had a great time. Simeon he's sort of schooling me on the way home in the truck. He's like, Dad, what you don't understand about fishing, people that love fishing, is that it's not about catching fish. It's just about being there with each other. He's like, to me, that's fun. He's right. I don't understand that. That's why I don't like fishing at all. But I get it. I think that's part of the allure. So we go fishing, but he's 13, and one of the things we do with my boys, what I do with my boys, is when they turn 13, I do think it's a kind of a landmark for them. And it's some sort of gesture, some sort of movement from childhood into what I would say is the beginning of manhood. And so we just take a minute, and with my firstborn, with Noah, I got a bunch of men, sort of my dad and some uncles and people around the community to sort of speak into his life. But now Simeon has his brothers and he has me, so just even within the nuclear family. So we had this moment yesterday where we sat in the back of my truck and we just started talking about what is manhood, and the other boys are kind of pouring into him, saying their 2 cents, and then I sort of tell him what my view of manhood is, what I think the scriptures say about manhood and the call to love sacrificially and so on. And then at the end we prayed for him, and we prayed over him, and his two brothers prayed for him, and then I prayed for him. And what you may or may not know about Monica and I is that I have always carried this deep conviction that these children are not ours, that they actually belong to God, that they belong to God before they were conceived, and that our work as parents is actually to lead them back to their Creator, that we are just go-betweens, intermediaries. We aren't even that important in the grand scheme of things in their life, only that they would somehow find their way to God. We are in their life, the role of John the Baptist. We prepare the way. We're forerunners. And in that way, one of the very first things we do is name them. And I've felt ever since I was a very young man. I mean, our first Jael was born when I was 21. And I felt even then that we were supposed to hear their name from God, that he had a name for them. And we were supposed to try, to struggle, to strive, to hear that name and speak it over the child. And so here we are in the back of my truck, and it comes time for me to pray for Simeon, and I put my hand on his head. And what I did is I didn't just pray that God would use him or do whatever God wants to do, but I prayed his name over him. Because for me at least, and I could be wrong, but for me, I think I understand what it was God had in his heart for this little boy and the man that he was supposed to become. And that name, Simeon, for us, at least it means someone who would have this deep, persevering life of prayer, this inner life, that he would be able to spend long periods of time in the presence of God. And so I prayed that prayer over him, that there would be an awakening in his inner life, that he would be Simeon, that he would be the man, this man who is faithful in prayer, persevering in the depths of God and to know God in ways that all of us will be in awe of. I think, I believe that's who he's supposed to be. I prayed his name back to him. This deep inner life that I want him to have. You see, when we think about naming that way, it's not just what I'm going to call him, but it's what God is calling him to be. And it reminds us of that. It draws us back to it. When we see naming this way, it's connected then to prophecy and calling. And don't get freaked out by that word. In fact, I want to use it this morning. I want to help you understand a little more than you did when you walked in about what prophecy actually is. And that actually all of us, every single person in this room, is supposed to prophesy over other people. You are supposed to be a prophet of the Most High. And there's something connected here between prophecy and calling. I mean, when the idea of calling, like I'm calling you, and if I have to call you, if I have to call Christian, or I have to call Tammy, or I have to call Jeremy, I have to say a name out loud. How do you know I'm calling you? What does it even mean to be called by God if he does not know you by your name? And when he whispers that name, when he shouts that name, can you hear him? Do you know he's talking to you? Well, only if you know that first name, that older name. Only if you know it. Something really deeply connected between our understanding of our purpose or our destiny and our calling. That word we use, it's occupational or vocational or whatever, but our sense of calling and our name. The name that God has given us. By the way, God has no nicknames for you. He is not so glib. When he calls you something, there is always destiny in it. In fact, if I could even just spend a moment with God and sort of turn my back to him and see what he says to me, because he would have to sort of get my attention, whatever he said would matter. It would have in it, it would be pregnant with destiny. If he says to me, hey, bossy pants, it's like, oh, that's who I am? No. Wait, he's talking to me, isn't he? He says, handsome, hey, handsome. Wow. That's me. Can you see the difference? My grandfather, my maternal grandfather, just occurred to me. Used to call people like gorgeous or beautiful. He would say, I don't think it was a different time, so I don't think it was sexual harassment or anything like that, but maybe it was, I don't know. But he would say to people, he would call them things like beautiful. Which I don't know, depending on the person, I can imagine that could be actually quite powerful. In point of fact. I remember I was 10 years in, as I was on staff within a varsity, and I'd come to my 10-year, whatever it is, anniversary celebration, whatever, and we were at a regional staff conference, and my supervisor at the time was a guy called Bruce Allwood, and he just wanted to recognize that I had reached this 10-year mark. And so he wanted to say a few words about me. He had a couple little gifts that he gave, and he just wanted to say in front of the room full of people, it was maybe 50 people or something in this regional staff conference, and he wanted to just say something affirming about me. And so he started talking, and I can still remember he said something, he started describing me, and he said something which I just assumed everybody in the room, didn't mean a lot, it probably just passed over them, but it hit me like an arrow to my heart. He said, Brian, he said, a lot of you don't know, and Bruce was not this sort of penetrating speaker. He was just sort of a regular dude that talked conversationally. It's a lot of you may not know this about Brian, but Brian is actually, and he said this statement, he said, Brian is actually a servant. And then he started to go on and say more like he really is a servant. And I'm going to tell you something that awakened something in my spirit, because no one had ever called me a servant before. I mean, I had been called many good things, many positive things that had maybe more to do with my giftedness or my potential or something like that, but I don't know that anyone ever referred to me in this naming kind of way to say, especially in this authoritative way, to say, Brian is a servant. And I'm going to tell you something. When I heard that, I knew it was my name. It was like an echo of my older name, my truer name. When you hear it, you know. You know. And it's not even necessarily something that you want or don't want. It's just this awareness of a destiny. And I would say, if you know me, or if you know the life that I've created for myself, it is to serve people, to lose myself in the service of other people. And I know that somehow my own healing, my own destiny is wrapped up in being a servant to others, to actually serve other people's agendas, not my own. Now that may not be your name, but I know it's mine. And everything about my journey, everything about who I'm supposed to be is wrapped up in that name. And when I am a servant, I feel right with God. And when I'm not, when I fall into some other identity to control or boss or take over or have my own agenda, I know that I'm off the person I'm supposed to be. And there's this moment when Zechariah says over his baby boy, over this newborn child, this 8-day-old son, he says, "You, my child, will be called." He's already said his name is John, that's settled. But now he wants to say more. He wants to say what he's going to be called. Think about that phrase for a second. There's so much going on. You will be called. That alone changes who we are. Listen, college students, younger people, listen to me. You are called to something. You have a calling. You don't just need to roll the dice on the major choices and be like, oh, which one? Or which one gets me out of here quicker? You don't just have to do that. You have a calling. And by the way, it may not be in the majors at your school. You may look for them all and you just don't see it on there. You have a calling. You will be called. He's saying to his little boy, he's saying, you'll be called to do something, to be something more than just live through life or survive. You will be called. You'll be called by us. So we will call you something, but also you will be called by God. It's this power of a father's words over his son. Does John become the man he does because of the call of God on his life? Yes, of course. But does John also become the man he becomes because of the blessing and belief of his father? Yes, you better believe it. Both things conspire to make John, as Jesus would later go on to say of his adult cousin. Jesus said, there is no greater man ever born of woman than John. And we have to ask ourselves, how did that happen? Is it just because God has put this call in his life? Yes, but it's also because his father, his earthly father, confirms it. There are human beings conspiring with the will and voice and prophecy of God over this boy. And I think that changes him. I think that changes the trajectory of his life. It's not just that he has this name hidden away in the secret place of heaven, but this name has come to a human being who speaks it over him. And because that human being holds the position, the rank of his father, the significance. We can hold back or we can declare But we need to come to terms with the power of this gesture. And what is the end of the matter? What does Luke say at the end? He says, and the child grew, and he became strong in spirit. The child became the thing he was called to be. Imagine that. Imagine that. Imagine you becoming who you're called to be. Imagine our children becoming who they're called to be. Imagine our friends, our family, the people we disciple, the people in our lives and our ministry. Imagine them becoming who they were called to be, who they're supposed to be. And I think that he does, that John becomes who he's supposed to be, and he grows and becomes strong in spirit because he is rightly named by his two fathers. And because he keeps naming him, not just once, but throughout his whole childhood. He keeps remembering his name. He keeps remembering. I don't think that Zechariah just gets this right and then becomes a horrible father later for John to become who John is. I think he remembers probably I'm sure he had moments where he didn't. But by and large, I think Zechariah is going to remember this name. You know, we name things all the time. You know that, right? You might think, look, I'm 20. I'm not having any kids soon. Where's this going? You know, I named my dog, or maybe I named my car. I named my car. But that can't have a lot of meaning or significance. Listen, we name everything in our lives. We name each other. We name ourselves. We name everything. We name our day. How often have you said, people say, how was your day? And we say, it was a bad day. We name our jobs. We call them dead-end jobs. We name our bosses. We call them incompetent bosses. We name our marriages. We call them loveless. We name our teachers, our leaders. We name our friends. We name our homes, we name our journeys, we name our state of mind. This is crazy. Do you know that in 1952, the first DSM manual, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, came out, 1952. There were 106 disorders in the DSM Volume 1, which you would think, well, this is great. Thank you, mental health community, for helping us to see that there are 106 names for just how crazy you are. And that's fine. But the problem is, a few years later, they keep adding names. And each time a new volume of the DSM comes out, guess what? You're crazier than you were before. Not only that, but there's more names for just how crazy people are. In 1980, the number of disorders in the DSM was 246. And I think the current DSM, I think Volume 5, has over 300 names for your brain. And what's wrong with it? That's what we do. We name things. You can't just be you anymore. Now you're bipolar, personality defective, infected, rejected disorder, whatever. I don't mean to demean it, but it isn't science, by the way. We can talk about that if you want after. We name each other. We name ourselves. You know, it's ironic. I actually think the person we probably name correctly the most is God. I actually think we probably get the name of God or the names of God right more often than not. But the problem is, the irony there is that God is the one person who what you name him does not matter. He's the one person unaffected by what you think his name is. Because he already knows himself. He is unchanging. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And if you get his name wrong, it will not affect him. Do you understand? If you say, God, you're so unfair, he's not like, oh, my insecurities are bubbling up now, and I worried if I was unfair, and then he goes off and talks to all the angels. Do you guys think I'm unfair? Should I have handled that differently? He's so codependent, you know. It doesn't bother God. It doesn't affect God if you get his name right or not. But everything else you name, it does affect them. Everyone else we name, It does affect them. And it seems to me we often get those names horribly wrong. Horribly wrong. Everything else we name, we change it in the naming of it, at least for ourselves, if not for others. We change it by naming it. Because it is prophecy. The naming of a thing is saying of that thing, this is where it's going, this is what it is. It's that existential stake in the ground that says this is reality for this person, place, or thing. And that's prophecy. And you say, whoa, Brian, I'm not trying to prophesy over my boss when I said they were incompetent. I'm not trying to prophesy, but you are prophesying. You are. It has significance, at least for you, if not for others. Depending on the sort of authority in which you say it and the people that listen to you, the influence you have, it could be quite a powerful prophecy, in point of fact. When you name yourself a fool, or worthless, or unlovable, or maybe you name yourself smarter than them, or better than them, or superior to them, do you not see that those names shape you? Even secular psychologists have come to call this phenomenon, self-naming, what they call self-fulfilling prophecy. It's prophecy. You tell yourself, I'm not good at that. I don't do that. I'm no good at that. Then guess what? You will work to fail at that thing to confirm your own prophecy. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know that you are your greatest enemy in your life. You sabotage yourself over and over again because of what you tell yourself you can and cannot do. This all to me has to do with authority. Who gets to say who you are, or what you're good at, or what you're not good at, or what you can be or what you can't be? Who gets to say that? And the problem is when there's a double-edged sword to this whole idea of sort of humanism or human ingenuity or human significance to say you are the master of your own destiny. You get to decide who you are. You get to decide what works. And so you know what? If you go to enough positive thinking seminars, you tell yourself, I am the master of my own destiny. I am amazing. I am powerful. I am smart. I am handsome. I am loved by people. I am awesome. And you keep telling yourself that in the mirror, and you think somehow that has the authority to change who you are. And it does have the authority to change your trajectory, but you don't even know who you are. Or maybe you say the opposite. Maybe you stand and look in the mirror and say, I am worthless, I am nothing, I am unlovable, no one will ever care about me, no one will ever love me, no one will ever give me a job, no one will ever trust me. And in both cases, it isn't just about being positive versus being negative, it's about you don't have the authority to speak that way over yourself. That's the problem. You need authority from some other source. We all do, as human beings. And what about what we do to each other? When we say, oh, she's a control freak, and we just name that person that. Do you not think that you're going to now not perceive their behaviors differently once you've named that person that way? Can't you see that if you've decided in your mind and named a person controlling, that you're going to look for, it's actually called confirmation bias. You're going to look for when they're being controlling. And when they're not being controlling, you will throw that out. Like I said, no, that's not real, that's not. So they can not be controlling 100 times, and once they're controlling, it's like, see? I told you. And when you say it out loud, it's not just how you feel about that person. When you say it out loud to other people, you change their view of that person. Oh, he's so manipulative. He's such a manipulator. You think you say that to a group of people and that won't change the way they interact with that person? And let me ask you this question. Would you be able to stand before God when you make that kind of pronouncement, that kind of prophecy over another human being, to say that the fullness of who they are and their life and their choices and their journey and their history and their future is all encapsulated by this one statement that they are a manipulator. You think you get to do that to a person? You think you're wise enough to do that? You think you have enough perspective to do that? And not just to do it for yourself, but to do it for others, to say to others, look at them that way, understand them that way, put this lens over their life. Guys, we destroy each other when we do this. We destroy community. We destroy the image of God in each other when we do this, especially when we define each other and name each other by our sins. Is it possible that that person has engaged in manipulation, that may in the future also engage in manipulation? You better believe it. There's some What do you think you're doing then when you make those definitive statements? And yet, I don't want you to be scared of it. I don't want you to turn around and be like, I'm never saying anything about anyone ever again. That's what I took away from Crucible this morning. I don't know anything about that person. I don't know anything about any people. And I don't have an opinion. No comment. For some of you, that might not be a bad takeaway. But that's not what I want. That's not what I want this morning. What I want is to awaken something beautiful, something powerful. Through the sinfulness of all that mess, there is something there, this to stir in us, this desire to inspire in us, to invite our hearts to consider the possibility that your words can shape a person, can move a person toward their destiny in God, that they actually could hear your name through their name through your voice. And just like when my friend Bruce said, this guy's a servant. I've watched him for years, and people don't know this about him, but he goes about his business quietly, just serving the work of other people. That's who he is. And guys, something comes alive when you hear that deeper, longer held, older name. But you could do that. You should do that. You should take on the role of a Zechariah. You should say these words, and you, my child, will be called. You, my friend, will be called. You, my co-leader, will be called. You, my sweet mate, my roommate, will be called. I think we've got to get in this business. We have to take it more seriously, not less seriously. We have to recognize the power of the things we say over each other and actually bring them into submission to the God who says things over us, who calls us by our true names. To hear a word from God for another, there is nothing more beautiful. It is the work of John the Baptist. We often strain so hard to hear our own names. And some of you might go away with this whole idea of naming and think, I want to know my name. I want to know what God calls me. I want to know, well, here's the secret. Guys, I want you to understand this morning. Maybe the only way that we're ever going to hear our true name is if the rest of us get on board with hearing it for us. That what we actually need is a community that hears the names of others and hands them over. And that's how we'll discover. Not because we go into a quiet place and say, Lord, tell me what my name is. Just tell me. I think he wants John to hear it from the voice of his father. I think he needs to hear it from Zechariah and Elizabeth and the whole community. I think that's why it's so important to Gabriel, it's so important to God to send an angel to say, make sure you get this boy's name right. So that every single person that calls him, even they're like, John, are you coming for dinner? John, do you want to go out and play? John, did you do your homework yesterday? Every single person that would ever refer to him ever would be like the one who is merciful, the one who ushers in grace, the one who reminds us of the favor of God. They'll just say that over him every single day, every single moment. It was that important to God. I still think it's that important. Listen, I saw this crazy thing on Netflix. There's a self-help guy called Tony Robbins. Has anyone ever heard of Tony Robbins? Did you see this thing on Netflix? This guy is ridiculous. I mean, I was like crying in this documentary and turning it off and throwing my remote at the TV. I'm serious. Both things happened in watching this documentary about this demagogue, this play God. And what was so amazing, if you don't know about him, he's just sort of like, I don't know what you call him, a sort of a life coach, positivist, get your junk together, I'm going to help you change your life, get the keys to life and happiness and wholeness and success and so on. And he does this, I guess every year he does this thing. It's like 6 days, and he takes, I don't know, 3,000 people in a room. You have to pay $5,000 to come. So there are people that like mortgage their whole life to go to this thing because it's like a date with destiny. That's what he calls it, date with destiny. And then all he does, it's like 12 hours a day. These 3,000 people sit in a room. I can't even understand this. 12 hours a day for 6 days. They just listen to him. But he doesn't just tell ideas. What he does, he goes into the crowd, and he'll do these, he calls them interventions. And a person will just stand up and in front of everyone, get a microphone, and he'll get in your business. And he's got a foul mouth. He likes to really get in your face, get hard, challenge you, come at you. It's sort of pop psychology meets life coaching meets personal trainer meets idol demagogue. That's all kind of happening at the same time. And what's so powerful about it is if you think of prophecy as having three elements. Think of prophecy as having three elements. One would be this authoritative word spoken, a word spoken with some kind of command to say, you are this. It's a strong word. And this guy has that stuff in spades. I mean, there isn't anything. He's this hulking man. He's this huge man with these like Shrek hands. And he when he says something, he just says it with this conviction and authority. And then it has to have this sort of latent thing. So that's external, right? This authoritative, strong statement, prophetic sort of utterance. It's like he means to say, I'm right, this is 100% true, and he's coming at you with it. But the second is this thing that's inside of us, this hope, this latent hope we have that maybe we're not completely worthless, this latent hope we have that maybe we were actually made for something, this hope against hopelessness that exists in all of us. And maybe, just maybe, we're not fodder for this world, that maybe, just maybe, there's something good in us and we're supposed to be or do something important. That exists inside of us because I think God put it there. And the third thing is authority itself, the origin of the word. In other words, all a person has to do is ask, by what authority do you say that? So even if a person looks at you and goes, you have a destiny, you are amazing, you're going to do great things, that feels really good because that has the first two things of the three. Do you understand? That feels really powerful because you're like, oh, I do? Yes, cool. And I believe this person. They sound so sure of themselves and so they're so convicted. And then you walk away and here's what's going to hit you in the back of your mind later, which I'm sure hits all these people at some point. Who died and made this guy God? On what authority do you make that statement? And actually, I think in his case, the authority that he makes the statement is to sell things, to make money off you. So it only sort of satisfies two of the three. I mean, there is an episode in this documentary. It's not for the faint of heart, but if you want to watch it, if you're up for it, you probably watch crap anyway, so it's fine. Just put it in your ask Jesus to leave the room category of things you watch or whatever. But I'm telling you, there's moments in it where I'm weeping because I'm watching a man prophesy. There's this moment where he stands with this woman, and you understand, there's 2,500 people watching, listening. And somebody just stands up, gets a mic, okay, tell me. She's like, I just have pain, I can't deal with it, Well, tell me what your pain is. She goes, do you really want to know? And he said, yes, I want to know. He's done this for so many years, you just think you can't pulling over this guy, he's ready for anything. And this is what she says. She says, when I was a child, I was a part of a thing, maybe you've heard of it, called the Children of God. And it's a cult. And she said, when I was 4 years old, I was told that the way to love God, the way to show love, the love of God, was by making myself sexually available to every man in the community from 4 years old. And you can, I mean, even Tony Robbins is kind of like, this is it's going over his head. It's out of his league. And you can see him sort of struggling. And actually what he says to her is quite true and quite profound. He says, you are amazing. You are a survivor. You survived this. And that's enough. And he does this prophetic thing where he starts speaking into her life these truths, which actually are true. Many of the things he says are 100% true. But I know that they're true because they're rooted in the truths of God. Not because I think they're true, because I want them to be true. Not because we got together and had we voted and said, do we think this is true? Yes, okay. The probably my favorite moment of this interaction that he has with this woman, I shouldn't go this way, is you can tell that it's just too much for him. So he says, I want you to stand up on a chair. So he has her stand up, and she's looking at this big crowd of people. And he says, I want you to look into the eyes. Look at all these men that are looking at you right now. Look at all these men that are looking at you. And so she kind of looks around, sees all these men, and he says, they're looking at you, and they don't want anything from you. They love you, and they don't want anything from you. They just love you. And he says, I want you to choose 3. It's crazy. He's just pulling this stuff out of his butt. He's just like, I want you to choose 3. Pick 3 that you see, and you see it in their eyes. You see that they don't want anything from you, that they just love you. And so she's like, okay, him, and him, and him. And these 3 men he's like, come over here. And so they walk over, and this is the authority this guy has, I guess, in these guys' lives. I mean, it's cultic. And he in the best possible way. And he looks at these 3 guys, and he says, I want you to take care of her for the rest of her life. You are now her uncles. And I want you to call her every month, and I want you to look after her, and I want to make sure she's okay, and I want you to make sure that she gets, and then he makes some promises to her that he's going to help her and train her and do some things like that so that she can help other people and so on. It's just powerful and beautiful. And I'm crying. I mean, don't you know that if I have a blocked valve in my heart, and I go and the surgeon doesn't acknowledge God, doesn't pray, doesn't do anything, but he unblocks the valve in my heart and bypasses it, and now my heart beats again, don't you know I'm healed? And God uses the hands of that pagan surgeon to heal me, because that surgeon has understood something about the world that God has created, something about the nature of the human body and the way that it works. And because he took the time to understand that you can bypass a blocked valve in a certain way, and if you do it with certain care, and if you do it with certain intensity, that you actually can make the blood flow again and make the heart beat again, and you actually can add years to that person's life. And in the end, what matters is that person took the time to understand how human beings work. But who actually in the end should be getting the glory for that? Not the surgeon, but God himself. And of course, what's so dangerous about this sort of halfway or two-thirds way prophecy is that in the end, the people will find themselves hopeless again because there is no real authority in this man, just because he's big or because he says things with conviction. And yet it does not change the fact that the things at times, sometimes a person will say, still have that same kind of prophetic power. And here's the irony. We have people like Tony Robbins who's willing to prophesy, even to stumble his way accidentally onto some truths and to speak them into people's lives and to see those truths because they actually begin and end with God himself, change human lives, and Christians won't do it. Christians who are rooted in the third piece won't say anything with authority to each other. We've lost prophecy, and secular people have picked it up. This, in the end, is the authority of Gabriel, isn't it? Gabriel's like, listen, I just talk to God. Do you understand that? So I'm not just saying this because I'm a fiery angel and I have this word for you. He's like, yeah, I speak with authority, but I speak with authority because I heard it from God. Do you understand the difference? I don't want you running around saying things with authority unless you've heard them from God. But if you can, if you will, if you're willing, if you have the courage to do that. And even if we do, even if we hear something about our name or something about the voice of God, what is the work of the enemy? The work of the enemy is always, what happened in Genesis 1? What happens with the serpent to Mary? What does he say? Or not to Mary, to Eve. Who's the person in Genesis 1? Adam and Eve? Okay, good. Basics. What does he say to Eve? He said, did God really say that? So even when God speaks authoritatively over your life, I'm telling you, the enemy will come and he'll say, but did God really say that? It's the challenge of authority. Did God really say that? This, by the way, incidentally, just as a side note, is why we desperately need a relationship to Scripture. We cannot just make stuff up. Prophesy over people because we think it sounds good or because it's positive. It has to be rooted in the Scriptures. And I know, by the way, in my own personal life, I know that the way that the enemy will come at me, the way the enemy has come at me through people, is for them to say something like, oh, Brian's just controlling. Brian always has an agenda, which is the opposite of my true name. And actually, if you really know me, I think, and it's not important, what's true or isn't true about me is not important, but as a way of example, if you really knew me, you'd say that isn't actually even true about Brian. Why do people say that? I don't know, but I do know it's the work of the enemy to try to undo the thing God has said in your life. To say the opposite of that thing. To get other people to say the opposite of that thing. To get you to believe the opposite of that thing. And in the end, Zechariah knows that our real problem is a problem with sin. I need to close, so let me invite up Jason or whoever needs to come up here. We can't hear his voice. We don't know our true names. We don't speak our true names over each other because we sin. Because sin has clouded, has darkened the sky of our world, of your mental world, of your relational world. And Zechariah knows that our real problem is sin itself. When you look at Zechariah's song, it's all about the deliverance from our enemies and forgiveness and salvation and redemption. Because he knows that our real problem is not just about being delivered from Rome or empire, but it's about being delivered from ourselves, from our own sinful nature. We cannot save ourselves. We never have been able to. And the idea that human beings can just prophesy over each other positive things, you are great, you are smart, you are successful, you do well, is just nonsense. It's nonsense because it does not bear itself out in human history. It's nonsense because for 3 to 4 billion people on planet Earth who suffer in extreme poverty, they don't just get to wake up in the morning, look in the mirror, if they have a mirror, and say, you are powerful, you are successful, you will earn $1 million today. It isn't real. It's smoke and mirrors. It's games. It's parlor tricks. It's charlatanism. But God, for every single human being who's ever been born, has called that child, that man, that woman by a name. And that name holds in it destiny. Something good, something real. And it should be the work of our lives to hear that name and to live in it and to speak speak those names over each other, to confirm in our hearts the things which God has said. The gift Zechariah gives his son is not just prophetic affirmation of his destiny and identity, but clarity on his relationship with Jesus Christ. He says, listen to what he says. He says, you will be great because you will lead people to Jesus. And this, my friends, is what makes a life great. Not the amount of money you have, not worldly success, not the amount of influence you have or friends you have, but actually in the end, what makes a life great is our relationship to Jesus. It's the way we can usher other people into a relationship, a life-giving, saving, redemptive relationship with Jesus Christ. There is no other metric, no other measure by which the human life will be seen in the wholeness of eternity besides that one. And we play at these games, and we chase after our tails and windmills and ghost stories about success and prominence and fame and celebrity, and all of them are nothing except this one thing: to know Jesus and make him known, to somehow prepare the way for our own hearts and the lives and hearts of others to come to him. Eve is friends with, my daughter Eve is friends with these boys. I have a nickname for them too, but I won't say it. But she has this little crew, this little posse of homies, and they're a trip. And one of them, I don't want to say more because I don't want to give them away, but one of them is in a relationship, and he's like asking me for advice in this relationship. The girl he's dating is like in love, and she just thinks they're going to live together forever and be married, and they're destined to be together and so on. And I guess maybe she tattooed his name or something, and he's like, whoa, what's going on here? And so he's like, Eve, what do I do? What do I do? And Eve asks him this question: well, do you love her? Do you love her? And this is what he said, bless his heart. However I felt about this kid before this moment, I just put him in this category of like, I really love this kid now. This is what he said. He said, Eve, I'm 15 years old. I love Call of Duty. I mean, we understand that love, a thing like love, is something that takes time to understand. We actually know, even from when we're very young, we know that the older we are, the more we have a right to lay claim to a word like love. And the younger we are, the less we do. Because it is beyond us. Even to say we comprehend it is something for the old and the wise and the experienced. Of course, many of you know we just recently lost Monica's mom to pancreatic cancer. And she was a believer, and so we have no doubt that she now rests with God in eternity. And she is full of life and joy there with him. But we are left. And her husband, Monica's dad, of all these years, of decades of marriage, of being partners in life and love, he has lost his bride. And there's not one of us here that would say that we understand fully the love of a marriage that has lasted 40 or 50 years. Not until you've done it can you say you understand it. And we can't understand that pain because we can't understand the dimensions of that kind of love. And when he grieves, and when we hear in his voice, every time we speak to him, he talks of his wife, of missing her, of remembering her. And we know again, we're reminded again that love is something you grow in. And the longer you do it, the better you understand it. We respect the age of love, the maturing of love. The prophet Daniel said of God, called God the Ancient of Days. You show love to 1,000 generations. 1,000 generations. We don't know about the love that has lasted 60 years. What about 60 lifetimes? What about 60,000 lifetimes? Can you comprehend a love like that? A love with that kind of depth, that kind of intensity, that kind of reality and truth. This is God. This is why John would say of God, John, who, by the way, was renamed by Jesus, the Beloved One. And he would write, all his epistles are about love. All his words are about love. His gospel is about love because God named him the one who is loved. And he says, actually John says in his epistle, God is love. It's a statement of equivocation. I've come to understand that God is this thing, this force, this power that we feel sometimes in some small way, we glimpse in some small moment between each other. Eternal love is something so profound, so tangible, so powerful, that it sent its only Son into the world to save a despicable world full of ungrateful people who barely believe in God himself. Never mind love. But this is what love does. It comes anyway. It dies anyway. And we, in our feeble attempts to love, do something more important than we can ever comprehend. We prepare the way for his story. What am I saying? I'm saying, listen, if you don't know your name, if you don't know your destiny this morning, if you don't know what it is that God has made you to do, I'm going to let you in on a little secret because I already know something about you. And this is that secret. You, and I'm saying this to you, hear this to your own soul this morning. You, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High. You will go before the Lord and prepare the way for him in the lives of your friends and your colleagues. You are meant to give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins because of the tender mercy of our God, by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, and to guide our feet into the path of peace. I can remember being a young boy and going out with my dad hunting, and he would take us early in the morning before the sun had risen and walk through these woods. And it's a fearful thing to walk through woods you cannot see, where there is no light. And he'd sit me down by a tree, and I would wait there for the dawn to come. And it's a frightful thing to walk in the dark, to wait in the dark. This is the condition of the human race. Walking in the dark, waiting in the dark, in the wet and the cold, hearing noises, waiting for the dawn. And this actually is the image that Zechariah ends with in his song. There's an implied image to this bit. I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's this implied image here of travelers on a long journey. And as they travel through the wilderness of the unknown world, the night comes and it swallows them up. And as the darkness overwhelms them, they're far from the safety of their homes, and the terrors of the night come, animals and unseen enemies, and so they wait, alone, vulnerable, exposed, and afraid. And what do they wait? For what do they wait? They wait for the dawn, for the sun to free them. And I can still remember being a boy, and when that sun just begins to break the horizon, and all of a sudden the woods begin to light up, and everything that you feared is now illuminated, and there's nothing to fear. And the dawn makes everything clear and drives away the terror of the night, and drives away our fear, and drives away our loneliness. And this is what Zechariah says that John means to do as he ushers in this coming of the one called Jesus. They wait for the dawn, for the sun to free them from the night and its peril, so that they might walk again and walk in the light of day, and walk, he says, in the path of peace. And he calls this arrival the tender mercy of God. Whatever you've been called, however you've been misnamed, Maybe it was your parents. Maybe it was your siblings. Maybe it was your schoolmates. Maybe your real misnaming has been at your own hand. I ask you this morning to just close your eyes, and I want you to hear me say this. You, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High. I'm asking you to accept that name over yourself. There's more. There's more to who you are. There's more to what God has made you to do. But that I know you are meant to be a prophet of the Most High God. You are meant to speak His words over other people. You are meant to hear His voice for them and to say it with conviction, with authority. You are meant to build people up. You are meant to describe them as more than their sin, more than their error, more than their ignorance or their foolishness. You are meant to see past that somehow through the eyes of God. And you are meant in the end to lead people to Jesus Christ. This is our greatest call in life. It is what will give us the greatest sense of wholeness, purpose, and destiny. It is to be one who prepares the way. That's what prophets do. And I'm asking for you, for us, to be prophets on campus, in our jobs, to not shrink back. On the night He was betrayed, Jesus, after He'd given thanks, He took bread and He broke it. He said, guys, this is my body which is broken for you. Take it and eat it to remember me. In the same way, after supper, He took the cup and He said, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for the forgiveness of sin. Drink it in remembrance of me. I'm just going to give you a minute. I know we've gone long, but it's okay. I'm just going to give you a minute, and before we come to the table this morning, before we take again these elements, this act of remembering, I want you to ask God for something right now. Now, I don't want to play God, so I'm going to leave it in His hands. But I want you to ask Him for a name, and it could be yours. It could be that as you walk up this morning, He wants to whisper in your ear, "This is who you are. This is what I've called you to be." I want you to remember something, an old name. Ask for that. But it's also possible that the name He will whisper in your ear is a name for another person. It's a name of someone you know, someone you hold dear. And He may want to whisper, this is this person's name. And then guess what? There's going to be some work to do after this is over. You need to go find them. You need to grab them by the shoulders. You need to look them in the eyes. And you need to say, I think God is saying, this is who you are. This is who you're supposed to be. So I'm just going to give you about 20 seconds, just in silence. Let's pray that prayer. Lord, speak to us. Name us.